Today's episode is going to be a whole blend of different stuff. See, I couldn't decide exactly what I wanted to do with the Digimon episode that I've been planning for a while, so I decided why not take a bunch of stuff that's popular on the channel, like venomizing things and turning things into dragons, and do a bunch of those with a bunch of different Digimon. And of course, I feel like I have to start with turning MetalGarurumon into a superhero, because about a year and a half ago, I started doing a Digimon as Superheroes episode, wasn't going so well, I scrapped it and didn't end up releasing it, but one of the drawings I did finish was MetalGarurumon as a superhero, and it turned out like this. I think I can do a lot better nowadays, but, let's make sure. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Gabe Uruman had been a superhero for nearly 3 decades when he realized he was starting to slow down. In his early teens, he'd inherited the abilities of the Howling Ice Beast, passed down by his family for centuries. He'd gone through many phases of his heroing career, initially adding a yellow sword to his attire to have an extra weapon in combat in his early days. Into his 20s, he dropped the sword as he'd become adept enough with his agility and ice projection powers to not need it. This was him in his prime before facing some of his toughest foes. After another decade or so, the lifestyle had started to weigh on him. He went into an edgy phase when he'd briefly become grizzled and cynical from years on the job, adding knuckle dusters and chains to his costume and flaunting some of his scars. He eventually got out of that phase, but now he was simply realizing that the years of heroing had worn on his body and were slowing him down. He wasn't the hero he once was, and he needed some kind of boost. Luckily, a friend of his had recently gone through something similar. A hero that Gabe had butted heads with at a time, and since had teamed up with on occasion, WarGreymon, had built himself a metal supersuit to help him continue his crime-fighting career with less risk to his safety. Gabe went to August, and together they built a new steel suit of armor for Uruman. One that not only would protect him from further harm, but could significantly amplify his power, even giving him an array of additional projectile weapons. Some would even say that he had too many rockets on his suit, but his philosophy seemed to be, you can never have too many rockets. And with the aid of his new, enhanced suit, Gabe Uruman's heroing career was not just renewed, but incredibly enhanced. He'd become by far the most powerful version of himself ever. Now, one thing you might notice about this design and the other one I'd done a year and a half ago is they're very similar ideas. They're both basically turning MetalGarurumon into an Iron Man sort of armor. With this one, I decided to leave off the mouth because I saw on MetalGarurumon the underside of his jaw kind of looks a bit more fleshy, like regular wolf jaw. So I thought, okay, it makes more sense to have this be a little bit like the Batman armor when Batman fights Superman, where the mouth is still exposed. Besides that, the additions to this one that I really like are the blade on his forearm, inspired by MetalGarurumon's tail, and of course the wings that I just didn't have in the last suit. Anyway, super happy with this one. I think it's a great one to start off the video with. Here is our MetalGarurumon superhero. And let's have a little comparison of this versus the old one. And now for our dragon of the day. To observe this beast, we take ourselves to the farthest norths of the Canadian wilderness. This creature is called the Vulcan Walrus Dragon, a beautiful and fierce wyvern with an array of interesting abilities and traits. As suggested by its name, this creature shares some resemblance to walruses, mainly in its long tusks, but also has traits of other animals as well. It has a harpoon-like horn on its head, much like a narwhal's nose, and its wings are a sturdy, shell-like material, making them similar to tortoises in a way. These wings serve a similar purpose to those of the American shielded wyvern. Being much stronger than is common for dragon wings, they can be used as shields to protect the creature from attacks. The Vulcan part of this dragon's name comes from its tail, the end of which has a club shaped like a mighty hammer. This weapon is referred to by locals as the Vulcan hammer, and can level large glaciers with a single blow. A final interesting note about these creatures is that a tribe of Vikings who, centuries ago, found their way to this region have since begun to praise these dragons as a symbol of their might. They built warhammers to replicate this creature's tail, and while they'd never kill one of these dragons, if one is found dead, they'll fashion armor for their finest warriors from its hide. Now, one thing I've noticed in going back through a bunch of my favorite Digimon designs is that my obsession with drawing giant hands and giant feet may have started with Digimon. I mean, I watched the show a lot when I was a kid, and it's not something I specifically noticed back then, but looking at these designs, there are lots of Digimon with massive hands. Like Zudomon here has really big hands, and I tried to lean into that in this design, but even the size that I made the hands in this don't compare to the proportions of Zudomon. Or even when we get to WarGreymon later on when I venomize him, his hands and feet are massive, and I absolutely love it, but I think it's kind of funny looking at designs where people are making the hands and feet way bigger than I would do, and that's something that I think is a big part of my designs. Anyway, one of the reasons I wanted to do Zudomon as a dragon, besides the fact that I just thought he was really cool looking and would transition nicely into a dragon, is the fact that I could once more make up for the fact that I didn't give my Thor dragon a hammer tail, because Zudomon is very heavily inspired by Thor. I was like, well, alright, I can give a hammer tail to this guy to kind of make up for it. For anyone that doesn't know, the Thor dragon was the very first dragon I drew in my series of dragon videos, if you ignore the Fantastic Four Dragons video, which I do. I think I did this same thing with the Reinhardt dragon from my Overwatch Dragons episode, but, you know, made sense to do it here too. Anyway, here's the finished result. I guess I'll make a poster out of this guy because, you know, it's a dragon and pretty much all my dragons I put up as posters on my Teespring store. I don't know how many people would want a Zudomon dragon poster, but what the heck, I like how it turned out, so I'll put it up anyway. Teespring store will be linked in the description of this video. If you haven't been to my online store before, there's lots of other posters and ink bundles and stuff like that. You can check them out. But anyway, let's get back into the next drawing, shall we? For those who might not remember or know, Astra was once an overseer, a being charged with watching over and protecting a dimension of the multiverse, but she'd abandoned her realm a while ago to spend time experimenting in the Everyverse, a dimension where overseers can try out new creations. She had a knack for making soulless copies of existing creatures from other dimensions and giving them versions of the Venom symbiote that she'd copied from Universe M616. Today, she's back at that. She'd gone to a dimension in which Digimon existed to make a clone of another dragon-like creature, Greymon. She had to do a bit of messing with his energies to convert him from a digital being to a physical one, and to give him his evolutionary abilities without a Digidestined on hand, but eventually she got her copy and brought it to the Everyverse. She tossed a symbiote onto it and watched as the magic happened. At first, the symbiote was spreading quite easily, but then somehow the struggling to remove the parasite activated Greymon's evolution. He first turned into MetalGarurumon, but it wasn't enough to stop the spread of the symbiote. He then evolved further into WarGreymon, and even as powerful as WarGreymon was, the symbiote continued to spread. It took over his whole body, lengthening his horns and stretching his already massive claws. The Venom logo stretched across his chest and wrapped around his back to his wings, and his once golden armor turned black, while his skin turned blue. While he'd become far more menacing and powerful with the symbiote finishing its sprawl across his body, Astra couldn't help being the tiniest bit disappointed that he ended up looking a bit like the already existing creature, Black WarGreymon. But this didn't deter her, as there were always more experiments to be done in the future. I don't know if throwing Astra into this is too much of a deep cut, but if you want to know more about her, go to the Venomized Dragons episode. I have some stories in mind for her, but first I gotta do a sequel to Biomet Kayla. But anyway, one thing that you will notice about this Venomization is the colors that I have here that you're seeing on screen are a bit different from the finished result that I'll show at the end, because this whole drawing was just a bit too chaotic. I mean, you can see there's lots of Venom tendrils and strands going around him, making it chaotic in the first place, but then adding in the yellow color of WarGreymon's actual skin was just a bit too much. I wanted it to look like the Venom symbiote was still spreading over him, but just that yellow made this whole thing muddy and weird and made our eyes go to the wrong spot on the character. So I end up tweaking the colors a little bit at the end, as if the symbiote has taken over his whole body and, is just finishing up having the goopy bits settle on him, I guess. With that tweak, I end up really loving how this turned out. It may even be my favorite Venomized dragon, if you can count this as a dragon. He's kind of a dragon, right? A dragon person kind of thing. Whatever you want to call him, I love how it turned out. Here's our Venomized WarGreymon. And for our final design of the day, I am doing Growlmon as a Monster Hunter armor. I mean, it doesn't really have to be specifically Monster Hunter, but I'm taking lots of inspiration from the book I have on Monster Hunter designs, and this is kind of a riff on my Anime Creatures as Monster Hunter Armors episode from a few weeks ago. And by the way, I feel slightly personally attacked by the YouTube algorithm for the fact that that episode has done worse than the My Hero Academia characters as fish episode. Like, that fish episode took me 7 hours, and it's done better than some videos that took me like 50 hours. I guess Games Test Lab had a better idea than I thought. I'm not actually mad about it, I think it's more funny than anything else. But anyway, back to the design at hand. I was super excited to be doing another Monster Hunter armor. I've really been getting into the designs of that game, even though I don't play the game. I just think the armors are so cool in that there's so much variety, and for this one I wanted to lean more into an armored kind of armor. I know with the Greymon one I had made it a little bit more leathery because Greymon doesn't really have many armored bits to him, so for this one it would kind of make sense to do the same kind of thing, but I was kind of avoiding logic a little bit more with this one, which I have more leeway to do because I don't write any lore for the Monster Hunter Armor episodes, though I have some ideas for how I can make lore for armored episodes if I do more of them in the future, which I definitely want to do. I might just not call them Monster Hunter episodes, maybe I'll call them like fantasy armors or something. Anyway, with Growlmon here, I wanted to try another design where the character has kind of dual-wield blades, which worked well for Growlmon because he's got those not quite blades, but blade kind of like things on his elbows. Of course, I made the sizes of them a lot bigger for this character. Like, the proportions that I'm pulling from Greymon don't really work. I made his hands kind of smaller than the blades on his elbows, which if you look at the reference image definitely isn't the case. I don't know, something that I've been kind of thinking about lately is there's a few cases where I let logic ruin a good design, which isn't really a good thing to do. Like, I really like how this design turns out because I just kind of ignored some bits of logic from pulling parts off this character. Like, the idea behind the Monster Hunter episode originally was as if some warrior had killed the creature and then turned them into an armor, but obviously that would mean that I can't really change the size of things that much. They would have to be consistent with the original character. So if I tried to stick to that, it would limit my options for the design, and I don't think that's really necessary for a drawing like this. I don't know, I hope that ramble of thoughts kind of makes sense. But long story short, for some of my designs, I'm going to try keeping less logic in the mix. Maybe that's a bad idea? I don't know. Anyway, I like this drawing. Here's how it turned out. I gotta say, this episode was super fun to make because I was in a different mindset design-wise for each drawing. I mean, I love making most episodes on this channel, but when I'm doing a dragon episode, let's say, by the time I get to the 4th dragon drawing, I'll be like, okay, come on, let's get through this. I used all my best ideas in the first 3 drawings of the episode. With this one, I was thinking differently for each drawing because they were all different types of designs. Makes me kind of want to do more of these in the future. Feels almost like a genre swap episode, except with, more specific topics. If this does decently, I might do this same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! Creatures, because I've been wanting to draw some of those lately. But let me know if this is the kind of video you'd want me to do more of in the future, and if there's other topics like Digimon that you'd want me to tackle in this kind of way. But anyway, everybody, that's all for today. I'm Christian Pearson. This has been PopCross Studios, home of the nerdiest art videos on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.